your lectures, like heavy on information, but also heavy, right? And so it's going to be pretty heavy generally. And so if you need to talk to us about that, please read up. Let's talk about the rights of the accused. The rights of the accused are due process rights and procedural guarantees provided in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments. These are the due process rights and the procedural guarantees provided in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments. Those apply to the federal government, but they also apply to local and state governments because of what amendment?
14.
The 14th. 14th is right. Okay. So the 14th Amendment is what also applies it to all the states. Because it's very clearly, hey, look, you have the rights, citizens of the state, to have the due process rights of the federal government. Okay. So 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th also to the states and localities through the 14th Amendment. The Fourth Amendment, which is my personal favorite amendment, I told you guys that Eric's favorite amendment is the first, but mine is the 4th. I like it a lot. And what I like about the 4th Amendment is this. It says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. It's specific. If you read it textually, it's specific. If you mean what the federal government meant whenever they passed it and the states ratified it, it's specific. Okay? And so let's think about some of these things. Securing their persons, that's me. Right? To be secure in my person. My houses, right? The Supreme Court over time has said houses mean that they're permanently affixed, and so trailers don't count because they could move. But later, the Supreme Court said, your car's an effect. So I think you have the right to be secure there. Scalia moving a little bit on that one. Papers and effects, okay? That means nobody can look up what it is that I checked out of the library unless they do what? Get a warrant with probable cause. Saying what they're going to search.
Wait.
It also means
Open records request could find that.
if it's a government official, then yes. But if it's private, then no. Also,
Oh, yes, okay.
Also, Eric President. So also your phones, your computers, papers and effects. We don't keep them in files anymore that are paper, but the Supreme Court says that's the same thing. And apparently it's so that means that your phone cannot be searched. You cannot be forced to give your thumbprint to open it up unless there's a warrant. Yes.
So that reminds me, I heard that we're only protected from having passwords, but
Biometrics are protected, but they're got around is the difference, right? I had actually a client many years ago who was in a very bad relationship, and she had a biometric password on her phone. And while she was sleeping, her boyfriend would use it to see what she had been doing. How do you guys feel about that? Good? Strong? No, gross, right? Okay, so my point is the government can't do that, okay, without a warrant, okay, without a warrant, okay, but with a warrant showing probable cause, then they can. You have a question, right?
We'll talk after class. I got the open records.
So the Fourth Amendment protects against unfair searches and seizures. You can search a person, plain view, anything in control, if you are arresting them or if you have probable cause to do so. If you're in a pursuit or something like this, there's reasonable suspicion or consent. If you say, okay, then they can search you. They don't have to tell you this. So here's my one story. I'm going to try to limit the amount of time I'm going to stop and search. Okay, here's my one story. Okay, my house had been robbed whenever I was living in Lawton. And so several months later, two police officers come to the door. Knock, knock. I'm, probably watching HGTV. It's possible. It's a Sunday afternoon. And so they come to the door, knock, knock, and they say, hey, Deborah Jones, come with us. You're under arrest. And I said, I'm not Deborah Jones. They said, you're going to have to prove that. You know where Deborah Jones is? They're looking around me. Can we just look in your house? And I said, no, you cannot. And I shut the door behind me. And they said, you're not Deborah Jones? And I said, no, I'm Melody Huckabee. My house was robbed 3 months ago. I thought maybe you were here to tell me you found my stuff. No, we don't know anything about this, but we know Deborah Jones is at this address. And I said, when? Because I've been here for 4 years. They said, well, we have a record of her being here about 7 years ago. I said, I'm not Deborah Jones. Well, can we just come in and look for her? No, you may not. Will you show me your ID? And at this point, I made a choice, right? I could say no. They could take me to the police station. They could find out who I actually was, and then I could sue them. Or I could show them my ID and go to my Facebook. So I said, stay here. I went got my ID, and I showed who I was, and they said, oh, you're not Deborah Jones. It's like, no. You have a picture of her? I mean, come on, right? So they leave, but my point is this, right? You don't have to show your ID, okay? At that point, you are secure in your house. You never let anybody in your house unless they have a warrant. And if you're not sure what the warrant says, say, I'm calling my attorney first. If you're ever arrested, I want you to repeat after me the four words that you're allowed to say. Ready? You're under arrest. What are your 4 words? I want my attorney. There you go. You got it? Ready to go.
I want my attorney.
That's right. Okay? Because listen, they're not on your side. Okay? And it does not matter if you did it or not. These are the rights of the accused, not of the guilty. People get accused of crimes all the time that they don't commit. And it can happen to you. I live a pretty basic life, as you would call it, in a derogatory way. I've been stopped and searched 4 times, or somebody's come to my house. That's a lot. I want my attorney. Okay? There's no warrant needed if there's consent, which means that if you say, yeah, I guess, then they can rip up your house, your apartment. Your landlord cannot give consent to your apartment being searched. Only you can. Cars, more recently, Antonin Scalia moved the court a little bit on this and said, you know what? It's a car on somebody's property. But again, it was on their property, right? If your car is off your property, there's an important song about this called 99 Problems and a Bitch Ain't One, in which it explains a little bit, right, about your rights. So he's a little off, right? But the same thing applies. You don't let somebody look in your trunk. Okay? You do have some rights. Orders or issues. Anytime this is one reason I get searched all the time. I traveled a lot doing research in South America, and the profile for drug couriers are white women going to South America. So it's very strong, traveling alone. So I get searched all the time at borders. I also got searched coming back from Europe one summer. They kept asking me if I'd gone to Amsterdam. I was like, not this time, right? What, drug tests are an issue, right? Can the government drug test you? No.
They have a warrant.
If they have a warrant, they can, right? Wiretapping is an issue. One of the issues with wiretaps is a lot of times there are warrants that we don't know about. And the ACLU, for example, said, hey, look, we're pretty sure that there's a wiretapping against us by the NSA. And so we want to know about it and we want it gone. And the federal judge said, do you know for sure? And they're like, no, we suspect. And they said, not enough. So you have to be harmed to find that out sometimes.
And police departments to get around wiretapping are buying like location data and other data from Starbucks. So if you have the Starbucks mobile app, they have been buying that location data off your phone.
They can buy location data from lots of places,
Yeah.
right? And that is many of the apps you downloaded, anything that has location data on it from an app that you have not very closely read. How many of you have read all the fine print for your apps? Neither, right? And so they can see where you are, okay? Because they just buy it because you agree to it, okay? The Fifth Amendment is going to prevent self-incrimination and double jeopardy. Self-incrimination and double jeopardy. What that means is this: you cannot be compelled to give testimony against yourself, okay? Usually, if someone is accused of a crime, they do not take the stand because you cannot be compelled to give testimony that might incriminate you. When someone pleads the Fifth Amendment 400 times, that means that they fear that they are going to say something incriminating. Okay? Pretty regularly. Double jeopardy means you cannot be tried for the same crime twice. Okay? You are found after a trial of your peers to be not guilty. You cannot try again. Okay? With a hung jury, they can. Okay? If it just kind of ends. But otherwise, they cannot. They can also try you on separate things. For example, the Oklahoma City bombing by Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh does not get his co-conspirator, Stephen, last name is failing me at the moment, does not get the death penalty through federal court. And so the Oklahoma City DA charges him with a state crime, okay, for killing, because the crimes that they were charged for were the federal crimes of attacking federal officers and a federal building, but there were children in there, right? And so cases, because Timothy McVeigh got the death penalty at the federal level, and he did not. What's his last name?
You mean Terry Nichols?
Terry Nichols, thank you. Sorry.
It's like
Steven.
Steven.
I think I knew it, Steven. Terry Nichols, right? And so he did not get the death penalty. So we tried it here in Oklahoma about the deaths of the children. Okay. And here the jury said the same thing. The jury said, hey, you know, he probably knew something was going to happen. He probably should have said something, but that's not that, right? So same thing happened in Oklahoma, same result. Yes.
So I have a question about like the searches and stuff and how that relates to the trials.
How do searches relate to trials?
So people a lot of times don't know these rights, and I think that sometimes the police know that and try to take advantage of that. And so a lot of the time people are like searched, especially like for traffic stops and stuff like that. If search somebody's car without a warrant and they use that in court, you know.
Okay, we have an important question. This goes back to the very first thing I told you, right? People don't know their rights. And the truth is they don't. And the police do absolutely know that. And the police use that. They do not have to be honest with you. Policemen do not have to tell you the truth. They can lie all they want. Okay? But if a police officer says, hey, if you don't have anything to worry about, let me search your car. Should you let the police officer search your car?
No,
No, because if you say, okay, or if they say, no, I'm allowed to do this. And they search your car, and there's some things that they can search. If you've been pulled over for a traffic stop, anything in plain view can be searched. Your trunk cannot be searched. Okay? So be aware of that. Okay? Yeah. What exactly is, it's a great question. Okay? It doesn't always apply, for example, if somebody sees, I think a good example of it would be, you hear an alarm on a bank going off and you see someone running away, right? I think that's reasonable suspicion. Okay, that's, in the pursuit of an actual crime, okay? The reasonable suspicion at the border, for example, the multiple times that I was searched the border, it's just, the border guard said, you know what, I can do this, because I was coming back from a law thing at Oxford. And I said, because you want to. And he said, no, it's called reasonable suspicion. So at the border, it's much laxer. Okay. Miranda rights inform suspects of right to silence and their right to an attorney. Supreme Court undercut this a little bit this summer, not entirely, but you have the right to an attorney. You have the right to remain silent. And again, the only 4 words I ever want to hear that you've said if you've ever been arrested or taken in for questioning are, I want my attorney. The exclusionary rule is derived from the 4th and 5th Amendments, and this gets to your question, okay? It bars the use of illegally seized evidence at trial. So if the evidence is seized illegally, it cannot technically be used at trial. Matt versus Ohio is the case that says that. However, there are tremendous amounts of good faith exceptions. For example, in 2008, an honest mistake. It was an outdated warrant. It was a wrong address. It was a wrong name. They killed somebody when they came into the house. Honest mistake. There's a number of growing good faith exceptions. The question is when is it not good faith? Right? The 6th Amendment is going to protect your right to counsel, and jury criminal cases, Gideon versus Wainwright is going to set the precedent for this, okay? He was someone who was mentally challenged, and basically he was one of the usual suspects. He was rounded up and he was railroaded without counsel into jail and prison. The court has ruled unanimously a lawyer is a necessity in a criminal court. A lawyer is a necessity in a criminal court, not a luxury. The state must provide a lawyer to court defendants in any case that involves incarceration. That includes, guys, DUIs. Okay? Because in Oklahoma, after the 3rd DUI, you go to prison. So that means maybe you should be defended pretty well on your first one. Okay? Trial should be speedy and of peers, but jury selection has always been an issue. Ethnic minorities, women, historically excluded. It's tough to get a diverse jury, in part because if you guys get a jury summons, what do?
call my
You
mom.
try to get out of it, right? You try to get out of it. You have reasons. You're in college, so you can't go. Sorry, right? Well, I'm in school 300 miles away. I can't go to jury. Sorry, right? And so jury trials, people try to get out of them. Other people, for example, if you go to 1 semester of law school, you're automatically disqualified from serving on a jury. If you have opinions on certain issues, you'll be disqualified from serving on juries. So you end up really with an older, wider, actually more female at this point, group of people. The 8th Amendment protects against cruel and unusual punishment. Okay. The death penalty was unconstitutional for a period in the 1970s. Basically, in the 1970s, we have a case, Furman versus Georgia, okay? And in this case, the Supreme Court and Furman's attorneys Furman's attorneys successfully show, and the Supreme Court agrees, right? That it's very clear that in the state of Georgia, if you are Black and you commit a murder, you get the death penalty. And if you are white and you commit a murder, you go to prison for life. The Supreme Court said, that seems pretty arbitrary. That seems like it's based on race. So until you figure out a way to make this not so arbitrary, not so race-based, then there's a moratorium on the death penalty. About 6 years later, states had come up with a new system, and it was called a bifurcated system in capital cases. Essentially what that means is one jury finds you guilty, another jury sentences you. And at the jury sentencing, you can have people come and say, hey, look, this is a person offense. They really shouldn't have been there. They had a bad childhood. All of these sort of things, mitigating. At the same time, you have people able to say, there were 6 people that were slaughtered from their neck to their forehead, right? So, both sides, okay? What has happened is that there's been a growth of innocence projects and DNA evidence. Minors and the mentally disabled are generally excluded, but there are exceptions. If you've seen a murder, I think, that would probably let you know about that. Bayes-Rees in 2008 is going to uphold the constitutionality of lethal injection, even with the missing chemicals. Oklahoma is a state, for example, that continues to have the death penalty, but there are chemicals that we no longer have because nobody makes them anymore. Okay? And so, in particular, this drug was meant to paralyze someone and apparently make it easier for them when they get the lethal injection. That drug no longer exists. Bayes versus Reese says, that's okay, you can still use it. Torture includes things like force feeding and waterboarding, which we'll talk about more, right? When we look at incarceration in terms of international rates of incarceration, 2012, 2013, and they're about the same now, I just don't have as pretty of a graph, so I'm using this one. 716 per 100,000 people are incarcerated in the United States. Rwanda, then Russia come really far behind, about half as many people. And then after that, Brazil, 274, Spain, 147, Australia, 130, China, 121, Canada, 118, Austria, 98, France, 98, India, 30. Why? Are we worse people? Number of people in prisons and jails for drug offenses between 1980 and 2011 might shed a little light on that. In 1980, before the war on drugs, state prisons had about 19,000 people in prison for drugs. In 2011, there was 225,000. The jails, the federal prisons, very similar differences. From 4,700 to 94,000 to 17,200 to 181,000. We tend to criminalize those things that make us uncomfortable, and we're going to talk about that, okay? What's interesting too is that our public perception of crime is actually at odds with the data. This is the percent of people saying there's more crime in the United States than there was a year ago, right? Based on this, crime rates have been skyrocketing, but in fact, they've been falling. And I'm talking specifically here about violent crimes per 1,000 people aged 12 and over, right? The crime rates have been falling. There's a little bit of a blip in 2020 where we see some violent crimes go up, but it's gone back down again. Why so many violent crimes in 2020? Anything going on that year? Oh, it's a pandemic. Yeah. People maybe were going crazy, yeah. Minneapolis as well, right? And we have. So how did mass incarceration happen? We declared war on drugs just as inner city economies collapsed. Factories, which had made up the core of inner cities, moved in the 1980s. They moved. They streamlined, they went to the suburbs, they left the United States. So people are living in the inner cities and relying on those jobs, that doesn't exist anymore. So 1970s, 1980s. And so we declare war on drugs. Both Democrats and Republicans competed to see who could be the toughest on crime. Right? We want to be tough. We're going to be tough. We created mandatory sentences, no parole, no judicial flexibility. So if I'm a judge looking at a 19-year-old kid, sorry guys, kids. I mean, as a judge, I have no choice but to send you to jail for 10 years, prison for 10 years. But as your professor, I'm like, I know that their brains don't fully develop until they're 25 years old. Right? The mandatory minimums, first-time offenders, didn't matter. Private prisons are also really big businesses. The great thing about being a private prison is this, you can say that you don't want people. So you can say, no, we're not going to take any of your violent offenders. It costs, I don't know if you heard, I don't know if Dan talked about this, we talked about the Cherokee Nation. To house someone in the Oklahoma system at $73 a day, but he's going to pay $103 a day to house them in a private prison.
Second highest in the nation per 100,000.
Second what?
Second highest in the nation for incarceration rates in Oklahoma.
Oh, in Oklahoma, second highest in incarceration rates. I think still number one for women.
Probably.
Yeah. Second highest in the nation. Private prisons are big business and they give a lot of money in campaign donations for there to be lots of prison terms for non-violent offenders. Because then they have this workforce that they can use, that they pay virtually nothing, and they make money off of it, and they make money off being a private prison. Michelle Alexander writes The New Jim Crow and points out a few important statistics. Number one, no matter what race, color, creed, ethnicity you are, across the board, statistically, people commit crimes at the same statistical rate, use drugs at the same statistical rate, but there are sentencing disparities. These tend to be systemic, and discretionary, primarily non-violent small-time drug offenders, and the poor in particular are manipulated into trial with no jury, plea deals. I was talking with a man who had pled guilty to a crime because his attorney walked him by the jury pool and said, look at those old ladies. They're not going to believe you. You should plead guilty. Disenfranchised. Ex-felons lose the right to vote, some for life. 600,000 in Florida alone. Now, Floridians, right? They said, hey, let's change this. Overwhelmingly in 2018, they said, that's not fair. You shouldn't be punished for life. 600,000 people never get a vote again. But the legislature rolled it back immediately. People passed it, direct democracy, and the legislature said, yeah, except if you have any outstanding fines at all, and you've ever been a felon, you can't vote. And then recently, the governor of Florida got people to tell these people they can vote. Hey, remember you can vote, register to vote. They went and voted, and then they got arrested for voting as a felon. Awesome. Oklahomans directly voted to reduce many felonies to misdemeanors, but it took 2 full years for the legislature to enact. And I'll tell you, if you're thinking about going to law school, a great, lucrative, easy legal job is the fact that then you have to pay people to go back and get your record expunged, and you have to pay every district attorney that you maybe had a various DUI with, right? You have to pay them $100 plus what you pay to get it expunged, plus paying for the lawyer. It's not automatic.
How much,
Yeah.
just for reference, how much does a lawyer average cost per hour?
I charge $250 an hour. And I'm kind of at the mid-range because I've been practicing for about 20 years. It's not unusual. I've had clients come to me and say, oh yeah, they wanted a $10,000 retainer before we even got started. It's pretty unusual. In major cities, almost 80% of young African-American men have criminal records and are subject to legalized discrimination for the rest of their lives. Because remember that money that you just had to pay that lawyer, me, okay? Let's say you had a friend, me, who was a lawyer, who could help you out. I still charge you some money because, hey, it's the way I make a living, right? And so let's say you put about $2,000 total into getting everything taken care of. How many of you have $2,000 right now that you can come up with in the next 15 days to take care of that because you need a job in 30 days? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd say maybe a quarter of you, maybe a quarter of you, right? Okay. And some of you may be, hey, I've got parents that I can go to. Some of you may be good savers, right? I am not a great saver. Okay. But imagine you just dealt with this. You've just been released from jail. You now have a misdemeanor, but you can't do anything about it. Do you have a job? No. Can you get hired because you have any felonies? No. Okay. The Black Lives Matter movement is going to arise out of this context. Okay. This is the context that it arises out of. And we'll talk about that more next week. John Carl, who's an OU sociology professor, writes this, well, in a second with also Mary Lewin, and it's called A Country Called Prison, and says, hey, look, race isn't the whole picture. We're actually also doing something else. We are criminalizing people who are frightening us. Mental illness, addiction. We criminalize these rather than treat them. Yes. Was not a felony yet after 1 year. Right. If you can't get it expunged after 7 years. Without. You have to pay. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not yet a felony, but you got it erased. So let's say it's 2 more after that.
Okay, good question. So the question is, hey, if you get something expunged, does that mean that DUI doesn't add back up? Actually, the police can still see your record, just employers cannot. So good question. So it can still be seen by the courts and by the police. That's part of the law. But you can still get a job.
So would you go to prison? Like you got 2 more, so now you have 2, but we have 3 total, but that's first one 3. So you got 2 more, would you go to prison?
You would, because the courts can still see it.
So it's there forever, but you can still do that.
Yes, yes. Okay, so,
I'm just curious.
no,
I don't, it doesn't relate to me.
No,
guys.
everyone's like, good, things happen.
Unsolicited legal
We're
advice.
actually thinking that increase incarceration. We talk about things like treatment, literacy. It all depends on what we want our police force to be. That's a big debate right now. What is it that the police should do? Okay, or maybe the police shouldn't do it all. Maybe the police should do this, and mental health professionals should do that. Right? These are the debates. Okay. But there are some tools to break out of the cycle of prison, and obviously there are things like education. There are things like, changing incarceration laws, and there's also a lot of people who really work to help people get back into the community. Okay, so your favorite amendment in the Bill of Rights, second poll today, and then I'm going to move on to privacy as fast as I can. This is going to be hard, guys.
You may take attendance too.
Yeah, you take attendance, and I'll come back to this poll in a bit. Okay. So attendance first, guys. Attendance first. I want to talk to you about this right to privacy. So the Supreme Court has said over time, although privacy is not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, the framework expected some areas to be off limits from government interference. And I want to give you some examples of those. Marriage, procreation, raising your children. All three of these are things that the Supreme Court said we don't have to define. They're not protected specifically in the Constitution, but we didn't think we'd have to. The right to have kids and raise your children as you see fit. So we have Yoder in the mid 20th century, where in Yoder they say, hey, you have the right to not send your kids to school after they're 16 because that's your faith, right? So this is for Mennonite and Amish communities, okay? So you have that right to do that. And so we talk about religious freedom, but also privacy, how you raise your children, okay? It's derived from the Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their what? Person. In their person. The First Amendment, that right of assembly, right? That freedom of consciousness. The Ninth Amendment, where, as I told you, they said, hey, look, there are other things, we just haven't named them. And then case precedent and tradition over time, that there's this idea of right of privacy. The first case in this area to discuss sexual privacy was Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965. The Supreme Court said that when it comes to sex and also medical questions, there is a zone of privacy that cannot be lawfully denied. Okay? Griswold versus Connecticut, 1965, dealing with the right of people to get contraception from their doctors. Okay? Supreme Court says there's a zone of privacy that cannot be lawfully denied. In 1973, Supreme Court hears Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court ruled that laws prohibiting abortion violate a woman's constitutional right to privacy through the first trimester. I'm going to talk about what that means in just a second. After that, it was a question for the state. Except if the life or the health of the mother was endangered because we have a right to self-defense no matter what. Okay? If I come at you with a knife, can you shoot me in the face? Yes, you can. Okay? Am I necessarily going to kill you with a knife? I don't know. Maybe. I can be good, right? Probably not. I usually just cut myself, right? But the point is, you have a right to self-defense. How many of you would say that if I come at you with a weapon or my fist, you don't have the right to defend yourself?
Yeah.
Okay, we are all in agreement. Okay? Self-defense wins no matter what, as far as Roe versus Wade is concerned. This is also refined in Planned Parenthood v. Casey. In particular, in Casey, the Supreme Court says this. The Supreme Court explains what trimesters are according to medical science. And I talked to some of you guys about this, because we had this discussion in one of Ella's classes, I think. So not this class, I guess in the next class. But essentially it's this. Have any of you, my father passed away 6 years ago. He was my best friend. It was terrible for me. It was unexpected. Like, it was a complication from after surgery care. Okay. And at some point, while he's hooked to a ventilator, he no longer had brain waves. In medical science, when a person no longer has brainwaves, are they a person? No. They're not. They're dead. This is a body and we show the body respect. But at that point, life is ended. Planned Parenthood versus Casey, this is exactly how they define the first trimester. At the point where a fetus has a brain wave, that is what we define as the beginning of life. We still have these other issues, right? Can the fetus exist outside the mother? No, not viable, right? It's not viable. So it cannot exist still on that machine, right? At that point, the Supreme Court has said states have a choice. It's a moral question. States have a choice. Unless, again, it's the life or the health of the mother, then states don't have a choice. The mother gets to choose to defend herself. Or not. Or not. Right? If my child is coming at me with a knife, do I necessarily shoot them in the head? Maybe I try to tough it out. Right? Approval for Roe versus Wade in December 2016, and I think it's at 73 now. I don't have the most recent, so I might have Eric look for that. But in December 2016, 69% say that Roe versus Wade should not be overturned. It's the majority of the people in the United States. 2/3, right? Overwhelming. Griswold versus Connecticut includes medical privacy, the right to talk to your doctor. All the HIPAA laws that we have stem from this. This idea that a doctor needs to tell me what's wrong with me, not my husband. Right? Lawrence versus Texas, state criminal laws against homosexual acts ruled unconstitutional because of a right to privacy. Roe versus and Casey right to privacy and abortion decision. Dobbs versus Jackson in 2022 this summer, the Supreme Court says there is no constitutional right to privacy. Roe and Casey are overruled specifically, but in that decision, Clarence Thomas says both Lawrence and Griswold need to be revisited because there's no right to privacy. A reminder about the 14th Amendment. The essential incorporation. It also includes equal protection of the laws, which we're going to spend a lot of time talking about next week with civil liberties. I have my poll for you now.
Sent you a new graph.